right, well, maybe while we're waiting for everyone, we can just get started. Just make sure everyone can hear me okay. Welcome everyone. Jean, you're recording. Welcome to our Vancouver Customer Success Community Meetup for November. The topic is churn prevention. Just a couple housekeeping items. If you haven't muted yourself, please do mute yourself while we're going through things. Feel free to ask questions throughout the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself when you do have a question with our guest speakers. But like I said, hot topic, we're going to be here talking about churn. It's a very relevant topic, especially nowadays, and especially as we head towards the end of the year. A lot of companies nowadays are starting to think about or focus their strategies around, maintaining that bottom line or retaining our customers, however way you want to say it. It's really just all about fighting that churn. So really topics that we could be discussing today are, how can we prevent churn? What data do I need to help ensure that I know why are my customers churning? What can I as a CSM do today to reduce the amount of churn in my book of business? All these questions plus a little bit more will be answered by our guest speakers, who I'm so excited to introduce you to. But before we do that, let's touch base on our mission. So we bring this slide up every time, but it helps us remind each other about why we do this. So just to say it on the slides, your Vancouver Customer Success Community, our goal or our mission is really to make a connected community within Vancouver, but the benefit of Zoom is it can be everywhere. And really we want to share experiences and learnings, help new people that are in the CS community starting their careers and help develop their careers, and ultimately promote Vancouver as a global hub for customer success talent. So that's really why we do this. And you might have seen some of us here today. You might have met some of us, but in case you're new, this is your team of organizers. So just down the list from left to right, you have Jean, Eva, John, myself, and Jackie. And really what we're here to do is we want to help build Vancouver into a world-class customer success community. So everyone that's on the call, you're all part of this community. If you have any ideas or want to help or any input around how to make things better, don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us. We want to make sure that every time we do something or we host a session, whether it be live or virtually, that that's always better, and we're doing things better each and every time. All right, so today I'm so excited. We have a powerhouse of strong women here to share their own strategies on how they prevented or how to prevent churn. They all have come with different backgrounds and experiences, so I really so they'll all have a little bit of a different take on how to fight churn. So I won't take much time here. I would love for these three ladies to maybe do a little bit of an introduction about yourself, who you are, what you do. But also, as a fun little icebreaker, I would love if you could tell me, if you could be a pasta dish, what would you be and why? Just for fun. Maybe I'll go right to left. So maybe I'll start with Kristin first.
Oh, great. I'm thinking about my my pasta dish now. But hi, everyone. My name is Kristin Padilla. I'm the Director of Customer Success at a local cybersecurity company headquartered here in Vancouver called Absolute Software. I've been in customer-facing roles. I was actually just trying to figure out, I'm like, how do I introduce myself? I've been in customer-facing roles for about 20 years now, in customer success or client success roles for the past 10. So, definitely seen the gambit of how CS has evolved over the years, and have been with Absolute for just over 5 years now, kind of founded the team, helped build it up, and we really work with customers in their post-sale journey, making sure they're getting value out of working with our software and, kind of connecting them with peers. So really excited to be here and have a discussion with all of you today. As for a pasta dish, the only thing I can think of, because this is what I make when we do potlucks in the office, is a mac and cheese. A good mac and cheese can go a long way. I put a little breadcrumbs on top, and it's delicious, comforting, and carbs in this weather, you can't go wrong. So that's me.
Great. Thank you, Kristin. Natasha, maybe I'll go with you next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Natasha Narayan. Nice to see all of you. I've been in tech for a long time as well. Actually, started at a company called Right Now Technologies, and what was customer success back then. We used to have scorecards back in like 2001 with a SaaS platform. So I was with them for 10 years. And then some of you might know me from Gainsight. I was the regional director for Canada. So I was the first employee for Canada for them, 2015 to 2019. And I was kind of like, well, I was sales, SE, marketing, kind of wearing a bunch of hats, and hosted a bunch of different CS events around the country. And then when I was at Gainsight, we used to use a company called Eigenworks for all of our churn analysis and our win-loss analysis. Some of you might know the story. The founder was from Guelph, Ontario, and he actually passed away in 2019. And I stepped in and took over the team, took over the company. We rebooted it as Iceberg with a couple of the team members. So we have a female founded. There's 3 of us that run the company. And so we now work with mostly US companies, some in Canada, where we do ongoing churn analysis as well as win-loss. So they could be one-time studies or they could be ongoing programs. And I just moved to Vancouver about a year and a half ago.
Great. And last but not least, Modupe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Modupe Okoh. I live in Ontario, but I'm super excited to be here. I work with Juniper Networks, and over the last 25 years have been involved in roles that span support, service management, application management, customer success, strategy, execution. So super excited to be here. In my current role, Juniper Networking is in its infancy when it comes to implementing customer success, because it is a hardware-based company, mostly starting to get into software and cloud. And so the opportunity is ripe for all of the best practices that we typically execute and have matured in the SaaS and cloud space. Super excited to be here.
Great. Nice to meet you as well. All right, so maybe what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thank you, ladies, and that way we can see all your faces live during this discussion. Again, for everyone that is listening, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, but also feel free to also unmute yourself as well. So I know the hot topic of the day is all about fighting churn prevention. I know in a perfect world, customers are happy with every vendor and they get value from every tool, but we live in reality and customers will churn for a lot of different reasons. So it's not great. Maybe I'll start with Natasha. I know, like you mentioned with IcebergIQ, you conduct exit interviews, you provide churn analysis, win-loss analysis, all that good stuff. In your experience, what are some of the reasons why customers churn, and maybe walk us through what happens? What do you do or your company does when a customer says they no longer want to be with one of your customers?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe I'll start with the second question. So just like best practices around a program, you might be doing this in-house already. Like we are a third party that companies sometimes use because you're getting like an unbiased perspective. And it's also a lot of work to do qualitative research. So some of the best practices that we've seen that I wanted to share, and I'd love to hear what everyone else is doing as well, is you want to interview ones that made the decision in the last quarter. So it's recent for them. You want to make sure that there's a program in place, that you've got some sort of programmatic methodology around it. But anything beyond that, we find it's just the details change, the competitive landscape changes, and the data becomes kind of stale. You want to create a research brief up front, like just have some focus areas with the key stakeholders so that there's some focus. I wouldn't have a list of questions. I would keep it very conversational, because that way you're going where you're keeping it fluid, where the customer wants to go. Spend time up front understanding what their original vision was when they brought you on. And then, you want to basically unravel that whole journey along the way, and then where things first started to go wrong, and also who they went to and why, if they're open to sharing that. And I would say definitely don't have the CSM do the interview because you want the unbiased perspective. So maybe there's somebody that's in ops or somebody that's got great interviewing skills or something that you can hone that maybe still with the organization, but that can have that kind of unbiased perspective, because if you have that bias, then it can taint the findings. Some of the interesting findings that we found, I don't want to take too much time here, but I did take some down today just from thinking about some of the interviews that we do. The CSM handover, if there's been turnover, so if there's sales to service, obviously for onboarding, and if they're not implementing properly from the beginning, that can obviously lead to churn. But we're seeing a lot of, if there's been turnover in the CSM team, they're okay with having a change in person. But what frustrates them is when there hasn't been a proper handoff in the information in the back end and they're having to repeat everything again and again and again. That's really frustrating. If there's multiple products that they own from you that they're using, they really want to feel that you've got a united front when working with them, that they don't have to go to one person for one thing, another person for something else. So as long as the CSM is kind of spearheading the overall relationship. A lot of companies have like 30, 60, 90-day best practice playbooks. We're finding they're making these decisions way earlier, 18 months, 12 months beforehand, and it takes them that long to find a suitable alternative, stand it up in parallel, make sure it's the right one, and then switch. So I actually think that the playbooks, you need to be having those check-ins much earlier. Price increases, I feel so bad for CSMs because there's so much pressure from you down from the top with these expansions, but sometimes, especially with the market right now, we're finding that it can often lead to the trigger for the evaluation. They might not have even looked elsewhere until there was suddenly a price increase, and then they start looking at the market, and then that's what leads to the churn. So you've actually created that instance where they've gone somewhere else. And then there's other things around like not feeling valued, and a lot of times it's hard for them to switch. They don't really want to switch. It's a pain in the butt. But if they're feeling that they're not being valued by you, you're not being flexible with them. We saw this through COVID, and I think it's continuing now with just what's going on with the economy. It's really important to be flexible and have empathy. So yeah, hope that helps.
Great. Modupe, Kristin, anything that you'd like to add in terms of common trends that you guys have been seeing, whether it be in your existing company or other companies that you've been working with or speaking to?
There are a few things that Natasha shared that definitely resonate. The perspective of the long lead time that and what it takes for customers to make that decision. In a past life, one of the things that was really top of mind was, what kind of indicators do you use to monitor where there's risk of churn, and how do you not only pressure test those customers that you are red, but those that you think are green. In fact, there was a phrase that was coined as you really want to avoid the green to gones, because you think that everything's okay, you haven't heard or seen any problems, but the silence is actually could be an indicator of risk. So that for sure really resonates with me. The other thing that I think is important and would vary by company is there an understanding of what churn means? Do you think about churn from the perspective of a customer that doesn't do any business with you at all? And this is prevalent when you have, with a company where you offer multiple products, or is it more of a downsell? And is that an indicator of even more? So making sure that there's alignment on what churn means and how to monitor for it is really important. What kind of warning systems do you have? How would that translate to playbooks? Very top of mind.
Definitely. I would, kind of build on what Modupe was saying, just in terms of that, green to gone. And one of the things we do, kind of a sentiment score, because we have the tooling from a health perspective for customers. How are they, if they're using the software, you kind of presume that they're healthy and they're happy. But you need to have that human element. You can't kind of program everything out. And so being able to understand that if they're not talking to you, it doesn't necessarily mean things are good and they're happy. We actually consider that a risk. You need to make sure that someone's talking to you, especially when you think about sort of single-threaded relationships. And if your champion is going dark, then it might be because they have a lot of other things on their plate, health issues or what have you. But you can't assume that a healthy customer has stayed that just because they haven't come to complain. I see a question that Matt posted, and maybe if he's still on before his plane takes off, around that frustration for customers in terms of capturing the right information as you're turning over team members, and how do you make sure that that new team member kind of is up to speed? Do they read through call notes and history? So at Absolute, we use, and my previous company, we used Gainsight and still do today. Obviously, not everyone can afford that from a technology perspective, but it definitely helps to have the timeline and have all of those call notes written down. But we do encourage kind of that outgoing team member to do, a bit of a summary sort of status. Where is the customer today? What are the pain points? What are you working on and in flight with? And if possible, have that warm handover meeting to just intro in that new person so they don't feel like they are being left in the dust. So that's kind of what I would add on that side.
Thank you, ladies. That was great. I did have a couple questions, and I think you all touched a little bit on it in terms of data points. And it could be different per customer or per company, I should say. But what kind of, we can have a lot of data, we can have no data, but what are some of your best recommended data points that we should be looking at to help identify which customers could potentially be either at risk or who should be churning? How should I do that? I know that seems like a loaded question, but opening up for interpretation, how you want to answer it.
I'd say it depends, and it's number of factors would determine that. One is what's the profile or the segment of the customer. You'll find that some of the behaviors of your larger customers would be very, very different from the smaller ones. So before deciding or determining what indicators to pay the most attention to, I'd recommend part of the program should be how are we learning, or what kind of analysis postmortem are you having? Because sometimes the analysis is it's not only based on the interview with the customers, but might also be based on a reflection internally on things that we've done or your company has done or not done with a particular account. So figuring out those patterns and then determining the indicators for a particular size is going to be huge. We find that with our larger customers, the process of certifying new software is usually an indicator. And if it's really painful, then they're unlikely to go upgrade to the next one or buy the next product. So that's a big indicator for the bigger customers. With the smaller customers, very different perspective. So I think it will vary by company, but also by size and profile of customer.
Definitely. I'd add, comparing to your peer size for sure. If you have sort of telemetry in place, are people logging in? Is this something that is part of their day-to-day? Are they being reactive in terms of logging into your system? As well as, maybe not necessarily in the product, but if you have digital enablement available and you have tracking on who's going in there, like are even if they're not talking to you, are they still learning and growing and interested in what you have to teach them in a self-serve manner? And then, just areas of product. So if they're very limited in terms of their use case and it gets too expensive for them, then that can also be an indicator that, that might be a risk because eventually it'll be priced out of their budgets.
Yep, and I would agree with all of that. And I think of even, a scorecard. What are all the components of a good scorecard? And yeah, usage data for sure. Number of actual active versus provisioned. Support. We talked about if there's no activity at all, that's as much of a red flag as if there is a ton of activity. So there's like all these data-driven components, but then also having some sort of subjective component as well, where CSM, or like, do you have executive sponsor relationships? So I think it's a hybrid of those two elements.
One scenario that I think, Natasha, you had picked on when you talked about the sponsor engagement is one that I think it's really important, especially now, not just how engaged the subject matter experts or sponsors are, but also whether there's any surrounding activity around that community company. For example, an M&A. If there's an M&A, then there's potentially, if they've been acquired or merged, there's potentially some risk, because more often than not, those companies, the combined companies, start to think about consolidation, and you always want to hope that your solution is the one that lasts or stays at the end of the day. So monitoring some of the externals as well is important.
Agree. Stakeholder alignment is super key. Definitely. All right. So I know I did want to circle back, unless there's other questions, actually, maybe if ever Jackie or Sean, if there are any questions, please let me know. But I did want to circle back, Natasha, around exit interviews. Very interesting. Tell us a little bit more about exit interviews. Customer tells me I want to churn. Maybe just share a little bit about what your approach is with exit interviews.
Yeah, so for us, we would work with, usually the CS leader, and we define how many interviews we're going to be doing. It could be on a quarterly basis, or say, and then they would give us a list of those accounts, like the key person, and then we would, then we would do an outreach. So ideally, the CSM, when they first get that notification, they would give the customer a heads up that they might be hearing from somebody for an interview to share, and that way it just kind of tees it up. But we'll find that we have to do 3 to 5 touches, like email and phone outreaches, spread 2 to 3 days apart. It's almost like an SDR outreach, even just to book the interview. And then we spend time up front profiling the person, the company, and then we go into, what I mentioned earlier about like what they're originally setting out to achieve, and then kind of mapping out the whole journey. And we try to do that in like 25, 30 minutes. So it ends up being a lot of unstructured data. But then you need some sort of system. If you go take this approach, then you need some sort of system to be able to code the data into like a structured format. So you're getting all the key insights. Are they product related? Are they onboarding related? Was it renewal? Was it commercial? Was it negative or positive? And then you can take all this data and start analyzing it.
I was just going to say, there's a great question in the chat around the emerging thought around risk detection in terms of understanding who you're being compared against. And that's a really interesting one. My thoughts are you want to do that and understand that before there's a problem. And if you have a voice of customer program or a way of checking in with your customers when things are good, through that process, you could ask them what other products they may be using that's similar, or that they're considering, or that their peers in the market are using. That way you start to get a sense of what other competitors for that particular profile of customer is on the radar of your customers' minds. That might be one way to start to do it. And then through the voice of customer program as well, start to compare your value prop against some of the things that they've shared are top of mind for them. That way you can build your playbooks around that. You can also start to position, here's what we're doing more of or doing differently, but you want to get those kind of insights before things get rough.
I agree. And like some of our clients will have us do health checks. So they could be, 8 months before the renewal due. And the script that we send out is more of a experience. We're looking to learn from, the experience, feedback about the experience, having worked with particular client. And so then when we get on the phone, we can really, when we have them, then we have that opportunity to really see, like, are you getting value from this? Like, how did you even explore this in the first place? And it's a little bit tricky to ask about competitors on that call, but hopefully if they are looking, they'll be willing to share.
I think we had Liz. I know you mentioned you had typed up a question in the chat. Maybe if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, maybe you can share your question.
My question was the one that was just talked about.
Oh, that one? Okay, sorry. I was reading
yeah,
it and as she was talking, I'm like, wait. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. All right. Thank you. Okay, so
we can jump to I was going to say we can jump to Jackie's question there. There's advice for designing the Get Well plan.
Get Well plan. Yes.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll kind of take on, with Absolute, we are kind of team-based. So the CSM doesn't hold the renewal number, and really partners very closely with the sales team, with the account management team. And what I think is really nice here is it is a team and you kind of specialize on different areas. So when you have a customer at risk, any insights, any of that data that we talked about in terms of usage and insights that you have about the customer that they may not realize, that's a big one in terms of just being able to show, because you work with us and we're able to analyze, well, for us, it's your devices out in the wild. You may not realize this, but we're protecting you these different ways. And so, just finding those value points on, if there are things that they can't do themselves and arranging a way to bring the right stakeholders to the table. Natasha talked about decisions being made, a year, 18 months in advance. The other thing is those decisions are being made at the executive level. So even if your stakeholders, your administrators love your tool, use your tool every single day, if there is kind of an owner change at the top or decision that happens from the top, they're going to be powerless. So it's really important to have that executive stakeholder alignment as well throughout the relationship. So, a lot of our Get Well is about being proactive and not waiting to the last second and figuring out how do you deliver value consistently to the customer, building, not just a 30, 60, 90-day plan with them, but short, medium, and long term, what are your goals, customer? Because, we always, I think we're all in tech and it's easy to kind of come to it from our own positioning and how great we all are, but what are their problems? Like really kind of tailoring it to their needs and their goals, because every customer is a snowflake. Everyone has their own, special kind of requirements. And if you can find a way to deliver value to them and show a consistent relationship, then I think they're going to be willing to be in it at the long term with you, but use your team, use your resources. This is something where the CSM shouldn't feel like they're on their own, and just make sure that the left hand and right hand knows what's going on. If the sales reps are talking to, different kind of channel partners, we're pulling in product leaders and making sure that you've got kind of roadmap alignment and executives. I think that's a big kind of, use the tools that you have internally.
I would just add to that by saying, when you think about the Get Well plan, agree 1,000%, it's going to take a team. But before you start to build that plan, there should be alignment on what success looks like. Sometimes success actually means maybe you don't want to keep that customer because they're a lot more expensive to maintain than you can afford. So definitely get alignment on what your success criteria is or your exit criteria. And once you're aligned on that, depending on how dire the situation is, ensure that the customer has visibility as well, that there's some understanding of what success means to turn the corner, because you could invest so much time and effort going down a particular path and things still change. So having that point of view around success or your exit criteria, balancing that against what the impact is to the customer as well as to your company around what it's going to take to make it happen is going to be really critical, especially with the big accounts. With the smaller ones, you have a play, execute it, and see.
Natasha, anything you want to add?
No, I'm good, but I wouldn't mind jumping in on the questions in the chat unless there's more we want to share on the last topic. Just about post-mortem learnings and how do you action them and distribute them. And it is a challenge because there's all this data that comes back. So we don't only present back to the VP of CS or the CCO, we make sure that all the executive stakeholders are in the room, because sometimes it's for CS to hold or to have all this evidence to present to the other stakeholders so that they know, especially if it's product related. Maybe marketing needs to know if there's certain competitors that have plays to take your customers away. We're working with companies that are anywhere from usually 20 to 50 or 500 million in revenue. So sometimes the CEOs in the room. So we identify like what are the top 3 themes of what we've seen, and then we'll provide quotes to support the evidence. And then we'll also break up the findings based on each of those, well, along the journey, and then also for each of those stakeholders. So sometimes there might be a little bit of overlap, but it's so that each, like sales knows what's relevant for them, onboarding leader knows what's relevant for them, marketing, product, that sort of thing. And it's not only what they love about your product, but we'll also have a section around the gaps and the roadmap requests that really they might have found in a competitor, or that they just really struggled with along the way.
That's a great call out, Natasha, that you touched on. It's not only what they loved, but also where the improvements are. I find that with postmortem, sometimes we tend to focus on the gaps. What do we need to fix? What do we need to fix? But there's also perhaps a narrative around what worked that we need to replicate. Mm-hmm. And that also takes intention and effort. So thank you for calling that out.
One thing I love about kind of that exit interview too is kind of the, it's not goodbye either fully. It's there might be an opportunity to kind of come back as a customer in the future. I think just as we know in kind of working as employees, you don't want to burn bridges. You don't want to burn bridges with your customer, and you want to maintain those relationships as peer, because having a graceful exit is also important. You can't save everyone, and Modupe, your point of, maybe you don't want to save everyone because some customers aren't a good fit, but you want to make sure that we're all human, and you want to be able to have a good kind of parting.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And like with G2, and we have a client recently where a customer was frustrated because they wanted out of their contract early and they weren't getting the outcome they wanted through the conversation. So they went and wrote a G2 review, a negative review, to get a rise and to get the outcome that they wanted. And they admitted to the client, oh, we just did that because we wanted to get this result. It was a tactic, but it just makes you wonder, like, how legitimate are these G2 reviews if that's what's going on as well nowadays.
Thanks. All right, I'm not sure, Jackie or Eva, if there are any other questions in the chat, or if anyone on the line has any other questions for our lovely speakers. By all means, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, and that way we're not talking over each other. But I think I just saw a couple.
Yeah, I just posted one. I was just curious on experience with running like either a customer satisfaction survey or NPS or basically any other type of feedback survey. Curious, like if you do, how often, like what is the cadence, and what do you do with the outcomes? Like how do you sort of complete that feedback loop?
So I can start. We do run sort of NPS, and I believe a user gets contacted twice a year, and they'll cycle through. They send it monthly, but because we have thousands of users, they try to hit different tranches. But what's nice is it's sort of run by our support team, And, customers, detractors, especially today, on one of our product lines are reached out to try and get a follow-up call with them and just understand more. On the other line of business, we actually contact all respondents to kind of understand and thank them if they're a promoter, or, kind of understand more as a detractor. And then we collate that information and share that internally, kind of, QBR style. We have a customer experience and product interlock where, a lot of it has to do with product feedback or feedback with the customer experience. And I think it's really helpful. It's been really insightful for our product leadership team as another kind of pillar for people to hear, what's important to the customer and what's working and not. So that's kind of what we do today.
Excellent.
That's a great question. I'd say we're still evolving. We have quite a number of listening posts, and part of the challenge, I see someone in the chat says coordinate with marketing. Part of the challenge is, how do you aggregate the insights from the different spots? What makes sense in terms of frequency and cadence, in terms of how you do outreaches within the company? We have a once a year survey that we send out that has that NPS questions. We also have surveys that would send out after a support experience or after an event. And part of the way the thinking is starting to evolve now is, what do you want to know from the customer? It may not be, would you be willing to recommend us? But is there a more impactful question to learn how that experience at a particular point in their journey could impact things downstream, whether it's post-implementation? How much effort did that cost you, take you? Was it more than you expected or not? Or after an escalation, did you learn anything from this? So thinking about what questions you ask when is one of the things that we're trying to figure out how to do better, because the are you happy or not on a scale of 1 to 5 after a support issue or once a year isn't always as effective. So it's something that we're still trying to figure out. But think about, if you're building this out, definitely think about aligning and partnering with marketing, and be intentional about where you want to ask what question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Sorry, this is Tony from Common 100, the Global Vice President here. One of the questions that we ask is, or I personally ask during enterprise renewals is, what nearly stopped you, Mr. Customer, from renewing with us? And you'll be surprised the kind of responses that we get back and the conversations that we get to open up with the C-suite. So I think that's a really good point.
I love that question. Thank you. We'll borrow it.
Do you mind if I tag on to this? Is this like an open discussion or a panel discussion? This is my first time here.
Open, go for it.
Oh, okay. What has been said so far is completely true, and that's from the company's perspective. So Eva, if we took a look at the customer's perspective, we need to show them that once they've responded to these CSAT, NPS, whichever survey you've sent out, that you've actually actioned it. And usually the respondents that see an action are ones that are at risk. But what do you do with your passives, your 6s, 7s, and 8s? What do you do with your clients who are saying you are excellent and over the moon? So if you are already doing something like an NPS, it is very simple for most survey tools to attach a secondary question saying, great, who were you thinking of when you gave us a 10? Or we're a 7, what can we do in your eyes to be a 10? Would you mind if we contacted you directly? These are really great ways to follow up on an NPS or a CSAT from the customer's perspective. And again, I wrote the note and you said thank you in the chat, but the other thing is coordinate with marketing and support, because I guarantee you they are already sending out these surveys and you don't want to bombard or give survey fatigue.
That's a great call out, Liz. The only other thing I would add is think about the persona of the person you're sending out the survey to. Sometimes if you do a mass survey and you ask a question that the buyer or the executive only is able to answer, and it goes out to the execution stakeholder, maybe you wouldn't get the results or response you're looking for or that you need.
Yeah, there's another way to tackle that would be that using verified outcomes. So obviously the desired outcome is what the customer's desired outcome was, and the CSM has verified that with the C-suite. So that's another way to really verify that with the personas to make sure that they indeed have received, the outcome with the organization from the folks that are going to write the check, or ultimately going to make their decision for expansion or renewal next year, etc.
Of it.
Another question that just came to mind, whether it's in the survey or in those health check CX type interviews that you could do to determine risk is, and I'm sure a lot of you know all this one already, but if your renewal was in a week, would you renew? And then just based on, it's a really good way to get a temperature check on what their sentiment is at that point in time, because then you can drive a playbook based on that response.
Jenna, thank you everyone. Jenna, I know you asked the question around software, and I think I've seen a few people start sharing things like Catalyst or Delighted, but anyone on the line, when it comes to the software that you use to identify churn, or if you do this manually, any software recommendations or that you guys have, apart from the ones that were already in chat?
I think our health score is internally calculated. So, and then we kind of feed that into Gainsight, and we'll do sort of CTAs, risk CTAs if health score drops, or if we have change in stakeholders as well. Those are kind of some of the tooling that we have. Yeah.
I've built some.
Jean?
I was just going to say, I've built some health scores just using spreadsheets for like really small companies. So if you're a team of like 2 CSMs or something, like don't worry too much about worrying about what software you can purchase. Like I would start with a spreadsheet and just start seeing what data you can collect and see like what insights you can capture out of that, and just start there. And then the systems that they're talking about, like those are all great for automating and trying to drive like a bigger health score, but you can definitely start with a spreadsheet.
Oh, definitely. I would totally agree. Start with the spreadsheet, validate it before you spend all the time tooling or purchasing a software, for sure.
Sorry, I think I cut someone off, but was it you, Liz?
Yeah, but I was going to echo your sentiments. Like doing a health score on a spreadsheet for sub 100 customers is completely acceptable. And like Kristin said, it also gives you a free way to check your data and figure out what your weightings should be before you've bought into an extensive tool where you have to worry about bidirectional syncs and the actual implementation and adoption of the software. So it's actually helpful to start kind of grassroots with an Excel spreadsheet before you purchase a tool, because you'll have enough hurdles of implementing a software, as we all know.
Sure. That's true.
Hi, do you mind if I share? My name's Lauren. First of all, thank you guys so much for letting me join. It's my very first time to join, like Liz said earlier, and it's really been a fantastic group. I used to be team lead of a customer success team at a CRM company years ago, and I have missed it since then. But this is certainly not a plug. I don't want to come on here and do that, but since everyone's asking about software, we have a services business that we represent, Zoho, and we're looking to build out their customer success portion. And so I'd love to speak with anybody that cares to share. We'd love to build out, Zoho for, anyone that's looking to do that. So that question is close and near and dear to my heart. And if I can, on the flip side, if anyone on the line here thinks that just having a chat would be beneficial, I'm sure I would learn from it. more than happy to share what I know regarding software or customer success. But yeah, thank you again for letting me join today. It's really been a great session.
Hi, Lauren. I have a question for you, actually, because I have a
Please.
friend he teaches at Emily Carr. He owns a digital agency, and he was telling me he bought Zoho recently.
Okay.
And he's like a one-person business owner, and they
Right.
had so much high touch with him. Like they helped him through onboarding, and it was just, he can't believe how much time he's getting with a person. And I was just curious about the model over there. Like, how is it, or is that the model that they have consultants like yourself to help onboard and then make sure they're getting value and then expanding, cross-sell? Or
May I ask, Natasha, was it, oh, whoops, I'm not muted anymore. So
no, I can hear you.
yeah, sorry. May I ask, what was your friend getting lots of help from Zoho themselves or from a consultant?
I think so. I think from
Yeah.
Zoho, yeah, directly.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty good at it. It can be hit and miss, to be completely transparent. With getting started, I'm really glad to hear that he's had that good experience. The model for consultants is really, up to the client. They're a great team to work with. We're one of their longest standing partners, top 5 in the world, really, in terms of. So we've been at it for a long time, and I've seen both sides. So nice to hear that was the feedback that your friend had. They don't always include consultants. It's hit and that's what I mean by hit and miss. It depends on the person, and yeah. I hope I answered your question.
I do have a question for the group. We've had a good discussion about churn prevention, churn learning. How do you operationalize that? Do you have a cadence? What works? How do you share the learning? Natasha, you talked about doing a readout at different levels, but if it's something you're running internally, what does that look like so that the learnings from one churn experience makes its way downstream or across the board? How does that work in your companies?
That's tricky. I feel like there isn't, it's depends on who's doing the readout. I feel like in some ways you need that focus time, especially in CS, you're doing so many different things. And if it's a priority that has that sponsorship at the top end to like figure out how to solve that and build out the playbooks for it. I don't know that we've completely figured that out. I'm going to be honest. I think a lot of it is anecdotal and kind of comes across the board. And if it's leaders sharing with others, then we sort of, and we try to communicate those, like what's working, what's not within our teams. But I don't know if I've programmatized it.
Hey, it's Tyler. I most recently ran revenue operations at CSU Data, which is an analytics company. I'll talk a bit about how I kind of like operationalize sharing some of the churn insights, but I don't think we nailed the kind of playbooks beyond that. So quarterly, I would lead a kind of like both sales win-loss review and then also customer success win-loss review, which was focused on churn. And I did kind of the two approaches. One was the story time, which I think a lot of people valued. So a few CSMs would come on, they would pick, one customer that churned that maybe was a surprise, maybe it was one of those green to gone, and it would be more of like the story time qualitative walkthrough. And then myself in revenue operations, I would pair that for the second half of the meeting with the kind of like data-driven view. So that would take all of those inputs that sales reps and CSMs were putting in the source of truth, and then kind of walk through the insights and learnings from that. So I think the qualitative readouts, some people find very helpful, and then some people who are more data inclined also get that part of it as well.
Awesome, thank you.
One thing that I found very challenging about customer success, and I promise this feeds into your question, is how customer success has become a dumping ground. And yeah, there's nods from every one of you who has their screen up. So to become the dumping ground and everyone says, oh, you're the reason churn's not great, they're not seeing value because of you. And maybe you have a much more modern company that says, oh, well, maybe they just weren't sold right at the beginning and we should be pivoting that, if you're lucky, if you have one of those. But usually it's customer success is the dumping ground, and you guys are responsible for retention. And this also speaks to how customer success has become wildly isolated, whether the individual within a team feels isolated, or the team itself or a company is focused on customer success feels isolated, because we're still treating customer success as the dumping ground. And so a way to avert that and completely change it, turn it on its head, is to have the CEO join the conversation and make each, whether someone in a senior leadership position for each department, accountable for some version of churn, some part of churn. And then they work together to figure out how that person will be accountable for churn throughout their department. And so when you tie somebody's performance and their expectations to churn, or maybe it's to retention, and you take the positive version of it, which I prefer, and give them some version of a retention bonus or measuring stick, that's when the teams start working together, and customer success is no longer the dumping ground, because my livelihood, my job, the expectations of me are now tied to retention, tied to churn. And so for things like product, where they traditionally haven't been tied to it, you can get them to sit in on meetings and say, okay, how many meetings where you do these readouts, where you inform people, whether it's storytelling with quantitative or qualitative data points, how many did you attend, and how did that impact your roadmap? Point to the part on the roadmap where you changed something because you saw it would benefit the customer, it would help with retention. So there are ways to start getting creative, but making sure that everybody is responsible for a retention or a churn metric, whichever your company deems appropriate, needs to be prioritized by the CEO, and each department needs to be accountable in their own way and tell the company how they're going to be accountable in their own way. So that's how I would operationalize it. And with my consulting clients, that's how we've operationalized it. And all of my clients have jumped to 110% in NRR. So it works, I promise.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks. I think we have a couple more minutes left, so maybe we have time for one more question.
It's not so much a question,
Sure,
if I can just speak. Oh, sorry. I'll step over someone here.
No, go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say, in the sort of the conversation that we're having, we have a sort of leadership-led focus on what we call infant churn, or churn before the first contract renewal. And that is what we're basically doing is looking at it from a point of view of, it's a cross-team analysis, looking at, okay, so without casting blame, okay, so is the sales process, can something be changed on the sales process? And then, as you say, sort of product, looking at those reasons for the churn, and then identifying what we can do to just basically reduce that infant churn. And it involves all departments in the conversation. It's not just the customer experience team.
That's a good one.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to chime in and just say that I think having a alignment across the board and the C-suite internally is really important as well, in terms of laying down the framework for what is acceptable churn. For example, it could be a non-ICP customer that have signed up by sales. So it's really key for customer success VPs or customer success in general to be really involved in the pre-sales as well, to ensure that there is an alignment on who's our ICP, how are we going to renew and expand that account later on. And if we do sign up a customer that's non-ICP, they will have lofty expectations which we cannot match through the roadmap or et cetera, et cetera. So having the alignment internally across the board is really important, that what is acceptable churn and what is not an acceptable churn.
That's a great call out. Do you, in your world, have varying targets or considerations of acceptable churn by segment or profile?
We do have different use cases, not so by, I mean, that's one cohort that we have put them into, as I have sort of taken over some of the legacy accounts. Because what we have noticed is they have made requests, or they will make requests for our product roadmap, which do not align with our vision or mission as an organization or with the product itself. So at that point, I think those sort of cohorts, the buckets that we have, make sense in terms of use cases, or depends on which direction that you want to take the product, especially next year. You know, we know that recession is coming. The companies are not going to be looking to hire, onboard new customers. So what that means is that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for CS to grow through expansion. So growing existing accounts. So that's where, you know, for me, that as a CS leader, that's where my focus would be, that how I would show value to my C-suite internally. And I would say that this is the acceptable churn, this is not the acceptable churn, but these are the key cohorts that we want to go after, because they will be adding new solutions or seats, etc. Because we know that people are having a tough time, or businesses hiring new employees, but they'll be looking to expand and squeezing everything out of the dollar that they're investing into the softwares.
Great.
All right, everyone. I know we are a little bit over, so such great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for your time. In terms of next steps, just so everyone knows, this is our last Vancouver CS meetup for 2022. So I guess early happy holidays. Too early to say, in my opinion, but hey, keep an eye out for your emails, for an email from us in January. We are hoping to plan a little bit of a social, meet everyone in real life in Vancouver if you're here. So just keep an eye out for that email. Otherwise, thank you, Kristin, Natasha, and Modupe, and everyone else that has joined the conversation. This has been really insightful, and a recording will come up. We'll be sending that out as later this week or early next.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks,
It was fun.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.